In this video, I'm going to give you a little bit more information about detailing. We're going to provide some annotations for these two wall sections, or you could call these wall details. And we're going to detail these out both by adding annotations, and we're also going to add some filled regions to give these a really good expression of how they're built. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to move these two drawings over to this wall sections and details sheet. And I'm going to then increase the size of these. And so, as I mentioned to you earlier, Revit is wonderful because it allows you to shift and move things around as you see fit. And I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of room to really learn how to show these two really important elements properly. So I'm going to begin by right-clicking on them here and deleting them. And then I'm going to click on these images or these views, and I'm going to increase them to a 1/8 inch scale and shift them down just a bit. And I'm going to change this to a 1/8 inch scale and shift that down just a bit as well. So what I'm going to do is just pause for a second and get these labels just a little bit more evenly placed, and then we'll come back. Okay, you can see here that I have adjusted the length of my labels and shifted the views over onto the sheet. And you can see here that there's a little call out for that wall section that I'm about to look at. And once I drag that back onto a sheet, this little wall section tag will populate. So I'm going to go to sheet A104. And now I'm going to drag those wall partition sections over. And I'm going to change the view to something a little bit larger. We'll go to 1.5. Okay, so I'm going to begin by working on this detail first. And so I'm going to focus initially on just kind of evening out the crop window so that it's the same on both sides. Then I'm going to hide some things. Right now what you're seeing here is the door, and if you hover over you can see, and I'm going to right click and hide that in view, because what we're doing is we're detailing the walls that are all this same type, not just this wall that just so happens to have a door in it. So that door is showing up because I took a section cut of a wall that had a door in it, but this wall type, there's versions of this wall that don't have doors in it. So that's why we want to go ahead and hide it. So a couple of things I'm going to do first is just create a couple of filled regions. So we've done these before. We just go to annotate and region and filled region. And we know that this right here is the slab. So we're going to go ahead and populate that with a fill that looks like concrete. You can see that it's not snapping very well. And so what I'm going to do is hit my X button and get out of it, and I'm going to do the filled region on top of it here. So let's go to come on, and I'm going to pick my lines here. You can see here it's picking all that line, so that's not going to work. All right, let's try this again. I have to zoom in really tightly because, of course, that wall extends and that this ground line extends to the extent of the project, but we just happen to be cropping it off. So remember, this is a graphic representation, so we're going to zoom in very close. And for our filled region, we are going to use this countertop will probably work okay. It's going to look like concrete. Let's take a look. Okay, beautiful concrete. Okay, and we know here, remember, this is our floor slab, so we'll go ahead and do another filled region there that looks like wood. Okay, great. Now remember, these are our baseboards, and the profile line is not really showing here because it's just sort of giving us a generic form. So what we need to do here is add a detail line that shows what happens if you were to slice through this wall, and you would see the thickness of the wood baseboard on top. Now, the way that this is drawn, it actually wouldn't be built this way. This wall would actually extend all the way down past this wood, and the wood, it would actually just go up to the wall. So what I'm going to do is create a little masking region, and a masking region we've already talked about kind of covers this area up a little bit. Oops. Okay, and so now you can see that the wall goes all the way up because we've masked this little part of the floor. We could have also just created a filled region here and here, but the wall part would not have extended downward. Okay, there's usually a little bit of a gap between the floor, so we are going to end up kind of changing this this filled region just a little bit. I wonder why it's not filling in with wood. Let's take a look. Okay, so now we've got our wood. Okay, so then the next thing that we're going to need to do is to create the drywall layers here. And so remember, this is a 1 hour fire rated wall type. So we just have to create a detail line on either side and offset it. And so 1 hour fire rated wall has 1 inch, or pardon me, ½ inch thick gypsum drywall on either side. So we're going to click on here, modify with an offset, and we're going to just offset it by ½ inch. Okay. And we'll end up doing the same things here as well. Okay, and then what we need to do is just add our little runner track here at this very bottom. So we're just going to do another detail line. And this is just a little piece of metal that's nailed to the slab, bolted into the slab to make sure that we can actually put our insulation and our other framing details and things inside of it. It's very, very thin. We've actually drawn it a little bit thicker than it needs to be here, but that's placed right there. And then the last thing that we need to do is add our insulation. So we're going to go to the annotate here. You click on insulation and look at this. Yay, there's our insulation. Okay, and we can move this over just slightly to make room so that the insulation sits in there nicely. You'll barely be able to see this on a printout, but it should be nice and the line ought to be nice and thick, because these two thin lines will be so close that they'll overlap each other. So it should provide a nice thick line. You can adjust the thickness of your insulation, but I don't want to overwrite the thickness too much. Okay, so there is your section view. And the one thing before we move on that I do want to draw your attention to is there are detail components that you can bring in if you want to, but they end up adding a little bit of complexity and geometry to the drawings, whereas we're just trying to do a very simple graphic representation. But I will introduce to you where they are. If you go to architecture component and place a component to load family, you can find within the Imperial Library in the detail items things like, for example, side views of baseboards. You can also have side views of, for example, studs and blocking. Okay, and you can load these in very simply, but we're not going to get into quite that level of detail. That's more for a construction documents class. So what I'm going to do is pause for a second and repeat these same procedures for this top part, and then when I return, we'll go ahead and annotate this. You can see here now I have mirrored the components. I didn't actually mirror them, I had to redraw them, but they are the same top to bottom up here as they are from bottom to top here. The only thing I did want to bring your attention to is up here we've got the slab above, but this is actually the acoustical ceiling tile, because remember, this is an hour fire rated partition, so it just goes up to the underside of the ceiling. But these can't be the same texture because this one is structure and this one is finish. So what we need to do is go ahead and do an edit type, and we're going to duplicate. And we're going to rename it acoustical ceiling tile. And our fill pattern is actually going to change from the concrete pattern to, we'll go ahead and do the dense sand pattern, and we'll hit OK. And it should change. Let's see. Yeah, so it's a little bit different. What I'm going to do is I'm going to edit it one more time, and I'm going to change it to the less dense sand. Okay, so now there's a visible difference between these two. So now for the annotations, I'm going to go ahead and just shift my label here just ever so slightly. Bring this on over here. Now, as far as for annotations go, the key to it is really just making them look neat and clean and legible. And so the way that you do that is you go to the Annotate tab and hit Text. And we can start with a single line, knowing that, of course, you're going to be moving and adding segments as necessary. But I want to start by touching the object that I'm annotating, not near, but right on top of it. And we can call this structure above. Okay, and you can see here it's 1/4" Arial font. Now let's see if it's actually 1/4" Arial font, because I've in the past been known to edit and duplicate type and not change the names. Right now it's at 1/4", which looks like it's pretty good. But again, we can always change the size of it if we have to. We have several different labels here that we're going to place. And so just keep in mind that we want to make sure that there's as little overlapping as possible, that the arrows touch where we need them to go. And if we can't fit the label for the ceiling treatment right here with a single leader line, then what we can do is we can actually have it bend just a little bit by giving it an elbow. But what I want to make sure that we do every time is go ahead and make sure that they start and stop at the same location, like it says there. And keep in mind too, this is easy to move. We'll go ahead and move that just for right now. Keep in mind here that we want to make sure that the leader lines are not too long, because we don't want the eye to have to travel very far when we're looking at these labels, and we don't want to have the visual clutter of really, really long leader lines. So I'm going to pause right now, and I'm going to label the rest of the elements on here, and we will be right back. So you can see here I've added in my labels, and I actually did have to reduce the size so that everything could fit and look nice. So all I did was just hit edit type, and then I duplicated. I renamed, yours will probably say 1/4" Arial 2. I renamed it to 1/8" Arial, and I changed this font size to 1/8". And then once I did that, then all I had to do when I went to annotate was hit annotate, text, and then I just had to select the drop down of 1/8" Arial that I had made. Keep in mind a couple of things with these leader lines is that I used a combination of single leader and ones with an elbow. I tried really hard to make sure that the leaders were straight, and then when angled, as little overlap as possible. Again, keeping in mind that my elbows are aligned, my edges are aligned, that they're touching the object, not floating next to it or just nearby. This one, I can go ahead and move this elbow over so that it aligns with the elbows above. This one can come over just a little bit. Okay. Again, just making sure that everything looks neat. And then again, I hovered over the viewport and then extended this so that it met with the outer edge of the longest text. Okay. And then now what I'm going to do is just move on to this one. And so I'm going to label it the same way, just keeping in mind, of course, that we've got the structure. I am going to have to create a masking region because in this case, the wall should go all the way down to the floor. Let's see if it lets me do it. Oh, nice. It lets me do it right there. So I'm going to, again, just adjust my crop window here. I'm going to fill in with structure below, the same conditions about the baseboards if necessary. It's going to look very similar to this one, in fact, except that the difference is that there's going to be a masking region here, because right now this is the acoustical, or in this case, gypsum wallboard ceiling, and the this wall actually goes all the way up and through, and the ceiling comes up to it because it goes from the structural slab to the structural slab. Because again, this is a demising partition, so it's going from the concrete slab below to the concrete slab above. In this case, it's the roof. So that if there's a fire on this side or this side, that it doesn't impose in on it. So again, it's drawn in this section view where the ceiling is sort of interrupting it, but in fact, this gypsum wallboard ceiling would be built up to it and connected, and then this wall would go all the way up through. So I'm going to pause. I'm going to create a series of masking regions and filled regions, and then I'll meet back with you and show you the things that I've added as well as the notes. So for this 2-hour rated firewall partition, keep in mind this is the demising wall, and on our section cut, if we take a look here, this is the section we're looking at. So on this side is going to be finished wall, and this side is going to be the fire rated, corridor. So if we look at our wall section view, you can see here that's what we're looking at. I have inside this view, inside this viewport, or inside this view, I have created a filled region here with the countertop finish, which in our case is going to represent the structure below. I have brought in the filled region here to represent the flooring, and again, we're going to have that same expansion gap. I put a detail line here and created a filled region, again, just to indicate a baseboard if there was going to be any. And I have added a couple of detail lines that I want to explain to you here on this bottom section. So this is our wall here, and it appears that it got hidden here. So let me go ahead and unhide it for a second. Yeah, got hidden. Okay. So this wall, when you cut through it, is actually a concrete masonry unit, and you may have seen a concrete masonry unit. They're those big 8x16 concrete blocks with the holes in each side, and that you fill with rebar and concrete. And so that's what we've got happening right here. So I'm going to place a really cool detail component here, and then I'm going to create a couple of offsets that indicate a furring strip and some drywall. Okay, so this is concrete block, and remember, if we look at our 3D view, remember this is that concrete block. Okay, so let's go to our wall section here, and I'm going to double click inside here, go to component and detail component, and then load family. Now, I just learned something cool. If you find yourself sort of down the rabbit hole here, you can scroll over here, and yours might say Imperial Library, and it'll bring you back to this, which is kind of handy. In any case, we go down here to detail items, and these are the specification sections. And the specification sections for our industry are separated into all of these different categories. And this comes along later as you create construction documents and you need to describe every little piece and part that you're going to incorporate into your project. Imagine that there's a big binder for your project, and each of these is a tab in your binder, and you organize specifications for projects this way. So in Division 4 is masonry, and we're going to use concrete unit masonry, so CMUs. And in here, we're going to grab this, and this is a CMU 2-core section, and that's a section view. If you cut through concrete, that's what it looks like. So we're going to hit open, and we're going to place it right here. Okay, now it's not quite the right size because it's a small one. You can see it's 4x8x8. So if we click on this and drop down our type, we're going to do the 8x8x16. That's probably the ones that you're used to. Okay, so now you can see here it's a little bit small, and that's because, you know, we say that they're 8x8x16, but that's the nominal size. They're just a little bit smaller than that. So we're going to move this over just slightly. Now, what's cool about this thing is that this is like a prepackaged, almost like a block, what we would have in CAD, but it's a prepackaged like filled region known as a detail item. And it doesn't have any geometry. If I took a section or a 3D view, you wouldn't see anything, but it's really just this pre-made element that allows us to create our details a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and move this wall line in, and I could hide this because it's a little bit, it's just a little bit off, and that's okay. We'll go ahead and add a detail line up there. Now, in the professional version of Revit, you can click and drag this up just like we clicked and dragged up the insulation, but we don't have the option here in our version. So what we have to do is just go ahead and copy, and we'll grab it from the midpoint of the bottom, and we'll just pop it right there. Okay, so there's our units, and on the staircase side of this wall, there's not going to be a drywall finish. But on this side of the wall, we actually are going to want a little bit of drywall, but you can't just stick drywall right to concrete. You have to attach a little furring strip. And so furring strips are picture of a piece of a thin strip of wood that's 1 inch tall by 3/4 of an inch thick, and you nail it in horizontal strips every 16 inches on center on the wall. And so we're going to draw a little section view. So we're going to have one right here, and then we're going to have another one 16 inches on center. So we'll see if we've got room to show both. What I'm going to do is draw a detail line here so that I can offset it. And you'll learn how to do all of these details in your construction documents class, and then also it's a big part of your professional practice getting to learn all these things. So if you're not totally aware of how this stuff is built right now, that's okay. Don't worry about it, but you'll get this information as you progress through your career. While I'm at it, I'm going to just go ahead and offset this. We'll go ahead and offset it for the 5/8 inch thick here, and I did 1/2 inch on the other wall, but 5/8 is just fine. And we'll go ahead and move this over. Okay, we're going to shift our wall just ever so slightly. Let's see. Okay. So we still have room to expand and contract, and then the baseboard is set up against the drywall. So this thickness here is drywall, and then this is our little gap where our furring strip is going to be. So we're going to just draw a very simple detail line. There's probably a detail component in Revit somewhere, but it's not really necessary for us to pull that out now. I'm going to just do this the quicker way here, and we'll put it 1 inch. And when you cut through a piece of wood that's used for support, it has a little X, kind of like a little stud. And so let's create another detail line and just see where 16 inches is, if we've got room on this section. It looks like it's right up here. So we don't have enough room for a second one in this view. We certainly could extend this view if we wanted to, but once we label this, we'll label that for as a furring strip 16 inches on center. Okay, so that's your section view at the bottom, and then on the top it's going to be the same. We're going to have that detail component, and we'll go ahead and place it this way. And I had a masking region over there because I needed to cover up where the plenum and the separation between the plenum and the room area is made with the um, acoustical ceiling tile. So I'm going to stretch that out. Okay, so there's our CMU. If there were crown molding in this interior, in this room over here, we would draw it in section as well. But for right now, we still have that gap for our furring strip. And we'll go ahead and offset that line. And then we'll do another offset, 5/8 of an inch. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is just kind of walk through what we have here. So once again, I've got a filled region for the structure above. I've placed 2 detail components here. There was a masking region over this plenum, or pardon me, over this acoustical ceiling tile. Here you can see it ran all the way, but I put a masking region right here in the middle to cover up. And then I did a filled region with the sand texture here, an offset 3/4 of an inch for our furring strip. And I'm going to go ahead real quick right now while I'm thinking about it and add that detail line in, because there would be another one at the top, of course. There's our 1/2 inch layer of drywall that's going to be nailed into the, or screwed into these furring strips. And you can see same thing here, gap. We've got the drywall here, baseboard as scheduled. It could be wood. In fact, it might even be vinyl. We've got our flooring here that's wood, the gap here. And then we've got the flooring on the other side of the wall. And you can see here structure below. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, what would this thing be? Let's go ahead and look at the room finish schedule. It's the mechanical room. Base finish not applicable. So there would not be a baseboard there. So we can go ahead and delete that. Perfect. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab, this is what's great about Revit, I'm going to grab a couple of these by holding down the control button, and I'm going to grab the ones that I can copy over. And I'm going to hit Control C for copy and Control V for paste, and they'll come right on over. And I'm going to move them so that they're touching what I want them to touch. I'm going to pause for a second and kind of move my leader lines and add a couple of the ones that are missing. And I'm going to shift this up and kind of format this page a little bit better. And I will show you when I'm done. So now you can see that I was able to add in labels and leader lines for elements that were missing. Like I say, I've just copied and moved things over. You can just double click and overwrite these pieces of information. So if you want to just copy and boom, 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 paste, paste all of your labels and then just overwrite them, you can. But you can see here, I've got all my labels in and all of my leaders are looking good. I'm going to go ahead and move this one up and over so that it's aligned nicely. I did actually change the location of this crop window so that it matched this, and so in doing so I did have to extend some of these lines downward, but you should know how to do that because we've already done it before. You just click and drag the detail lines to extend them to this the end of this box. I shifted around my the end line of my title bar by going ahead and clicking in here and dragging it. I grabbed both of these images and centered them towards the middle of the page, made sure that my margins are the same on this side versus this side. I'm going to move these up just a little bit so that the distance down here is the same as the distance up there. And the only other thing that I need to do now is just go ahead and change the name of this, because it is not a 2-hour fire rated partition any longer. It is a demising wall partition, and that's what you get when you go from this structure here to this one with the CMUs in it. So we'll change that to demising wall partition. And you can see here on your floor plan that now this tag has populated and this tag has populated. And you can see now by looking at that sheet that you have now a better understanding of annotating very detailed drawings and views, both because you know how to align your leaders in a systematic and organized way. You know how to make sure that the elbows are all aligned with each other, that they start and stop at the right point, that your text is aligned with this beautiful consistent margin. You know how to change your text size. You also know how to bring in detail components here. And overall, this sheet looks really great.